Welcome to the podcast. My name is Sifu Jesse Frank. My Kung Fu trade name is Moi Tin Lung. And today we're going to talk about the center line and the center as it relates to Wing Chun and fighting in general. And so just starting out, when people are first learning Wing Chun, the first thing that you're taught is the center line. And that center line is an imaginary line rather, that runs down your front, kind of bisecting your right and left halves, okay? And this is a really good and important thing to know. There's a lot of good juicy targets that run along that line: your nose, your chin, throat, various places on the abdomen. You can get somebody right in the diaphragm, and that can be fairly debilitating. Of course, the groin. And this is a very important thing to learn and to know. Part of the issue, as I've observed, is that oftentimes people, they never get past that version of it, and they're always looking at the center line as it is sitting on the top of someone's body. And while it's important to know that what that center line is, that probably shouldn't be where it ends. So as we're doing our techniques and stuff, starting out as we're doing our techniques and stuff like that, we need to learn what that center line is so that we can put our techniques on it, and so that we can go up the center. Just like in chess, if you've ever learned how to play chess, typically the strongest attacks go up the center, okay? Same thing as in fighting, okay? Your strongest attacks will always go up the center, almost always rather. Okay, so now the thing about this is that as we put our techniques on the center, super duper important, because just simply placing our hand or our arm on the center, it gives us a passive defense. So if for instance, someone is attacking our center, simply placing my arm on there does a better job of protecting my center than not putting it there at all, okay? So that's an important thing to have and to know. Important knowledge to have and know, rather. So taking a look at taking a look at some of the other reasons why that's important. One of the big reasons is that if, as in Wing Chun, if the best attacks typically go in a straight line, because they get from point A to point B faster. If I go from my center to your center, then they don't deviate, well, then they get to your center very quickly. So it helps us establish that. Now, the next stage should be basically your center, what I call your center filament, or the center axis, okay? So that center axis is essentially your center of equilibrium as it goes from the top of your head down to the floor, okay? And that will always be a straight line, because gravity is only basically pushing or pulling in one vector, and that's straight towards the center of the earth. So that is going to be in a straight line, and it doesn't matter if I'm leaned over like this, it'll be going kind of, I'm leaning to my right, it'll be going kind of down through my neck and so on down to the center of the earth, okay? So it's important to get your center of equilibrium, your center of mass, as close to that center of equilibrium as gravity is pushing it down to the center of the earth, okay? Another reason why it's important to have your center of equilibrium, if I could say that right, your center of equilibrium be as small as possible, is that becomes your center of rotation, okay? And the closer you can get the majority of your mass closer to the center of rotation, the more power you'll have, generally speaking, because while it is true that as I put my arms out as I put my arms out farther away from my center, as I turn here, my hands will have more velocity. They'll be traveling basically at a greater speed than my center will be. The issue comes in when we start talking about connected mass, and it also gives a greater lever on my center for other people to be able to affect, and that's not good. So one of the things that you can try is, put your arms out like so and just spin around in a circle. Okay, spinning around in a circle, and then as you are spinning, bring your arms in so that your fists touch your chest, and you'll find how you start to spin faster. Okay, because you have more mass closer to the center of rotation. Okay, and that means that your rotations will then have more power. Okay, that is super duper important, and it allows you to have more power to your punches, and it also gives you greater effect on your opponents, basically, because if their center of mass is farther out from their center of rotation, then what happens is that for a small revolution that I do back here, a very small movement from me means a much larger effect on them, and that's an important thing. That's one of the things that I think not many people seem to grasp as they're doing these things, but it's an important thing to grasp, because if someone's coming in, they're coming with a big swing or something like that, then this very small movement, this very small rotation on my part can really put them out a lot farther than one would think. So as we move from our center axis, okay, and fix our postures so that our mass is equally distributed around it as we can get, certainly when we're in Ijikimima, and as close to it as is practical. Well, then again, we have where our movements happen faster, and we have greater power in those movements for a given range of motion. Okay. Now, the third version of this is one that my observation has been that if many people don't get to the point to where they're at that second version where they're working their center axis, very, very few people in the system seem to grasp the center point. So your center of mass, basically. So my center of mass is essentially, and this can change based on where I put my tissues and different things like that, but the center of mass will be a single point, in the center-ish of your body. And why that's important is because, as we described before, with that center axis, as I rotate around it, I have greater power. Also, I'm going to take a few steps back. Something I neglected to mention about the center axis is that as incoming techniques come in, it becomes very easy to shunt them off, because the area that they're affecting, the smaller the center filament, the smaller my intent is to my center filament, my center axis, the harder it is for another person to affect my mass. Okay, so if someone's punching me, it's super easy for me by comparison to shunt that off or kind of roll with the punches. And even though we don't have rolling with the punches as is exactly the same as like a boxer would, we do have the same basic technique. Whereas a technique comes in, I might rotate and merge with their incoming force, because, as we should know, or as I'll go over in another podcast, everything's relative, and someone only has stored energy in relation to where I'm at in comparison to them. So if I'm standing here like this and they're moving like this, well, they have a fair amount of stored energy compared to me. And then when they hit me, well, then they impart that energy, and I don't want that. So if I now all of a sudden, if I match that here, so then the energy that they have in relation to me is basically close to zero. So now if we get here and they touch me here, you know, that amount of energy that they have to impart to me is greatly reduced. Okay. And if I have, if I'm very finely tuned to my center axis and my that axis of rotation, if I can make that a very tiny fine filament in the center of my body as it goes down to the floor and down to the center of the earth, then what happens is that it makes it very hard for them to affect me, because they then have the much more difficult job of affecting that center axis. And so, because as an incoming force comes in, it's much easier to act as like a revolving door and allow that energy that they have, you meld with it and match it and allow it to pass through. Okay. So now with this center point, basically, now we take that center axis and condense it down, because that is one axis, and now we can condense it down to our center of equilibrium, our center of mass, and now we can rotate 360 degrees for the most part, you know, limited by our connection with the ground, but we can rotate all the way around this point instead of on a single axis, right? And so now it's the same thing but magnified. So as an incoming force comes in, they have, with the center axis, they can affect, you know, all of that going up and down. Well, now with my center of mass, what happens is that they can affect me. Let's say if someone's really on my center axis and they affect me up here in the head area, right? Well, then what happens is that if they affect the center axis, boom, I get affected, right? Even though I may be very, you know, well able to shunt it off, if they're dialed into it, they're going to hit me, and it's going to hurt. Whereas with the center point, what happens is that, you know, which is going to be lower, right? Obviously, because I have mass above me and mass below me. Now, if they hit me up here, it's way easier to meld with it because I can move in 360 degrees around that point, okay? And I can also apply force 360 degrees around that point, okay? So again, that just opens up all sorts of possibilities, okay? These are, I think it's important to say that this is not the end. These are just 3 methods of using the center. There are a lot more, but it takes more training to get there, okay? It takes a lot of training to get past just that first version, okay? It takes more, and it takes way more training to get past from the center of axis to the center point, the center of equilibrium, okay? I think it's a good idea to keep exploring these concepts and seeing just, you know, where do they go, and how, you know, what can I do to not necessarily change the system, but to to deepen my knowledge of the applications of the concepts that were first taught. Okay. Now, one of the things that, as you move along, technique-wise, as you're doing Chi-Sao, when you're just on the center line version, I mean, pretty much all you can do is just stand directly in front of someone and do your Luxao, you know, and then go straight in at their center, right? And that's great. It's a fantastic exercise, and one that you really, really need to develop to its fullest. However, once you get past that understanding and you want to start affecting someone's center of axis, their center axis, well then that actually starts to open up targets all the way around them. So, and you really see this stuff being used even from the very beginnings of Selim Tao. You know, you're going out like so, and you need to have that. Really, you need to have the center axis as soon as you get into Chum-Kyo, is where you should start to learn this method. And as you get into Bilji is really where you start to think of things in terms of that center point, okay? But as you get into the center axis, and you start to understand it, all of a sudden techniques start opening themselves that aren't directly down this front center, okay? You can start doing techniques that are going to come in, you know, at oblique angles, because that center axis is now an open target for you, okay? And it's the same thing when you start looking at, say, in Bilji and different things like that, and especially towards the end when you put your hands up, you know, and then break in the waist and then go down and back up. There's a lot of applications for that, like a ton, and as there is for everything. And one of those applications is, you know, you're regaining your center. It's like I've lost that center point and I come back up, right? And or as I'm pulled down, I maintain that center point and return up to my normal stance, right? Now another one is that, okay, they've broken their center, they're leaning forward. I basically have, you know, what's essentially a double fook, and I grab them by the back of the head and basically spike their head into the ground, right? And in order to do that, using this method, you have to be moving around that center point, okay? If you want to do it and be congruent with the center theories and that sort of thing. You know, again, these are just some thoughts and observations about what the center is. There's a lot more to it. There always will be. And one can never go over all of it in a single podcast or a single day, a single year. That's why it takes years and years of training to master this stuff. And what I would say for folks, if you're watching this and you've made it you made it this far to the end, is take a look at what it is that you're doing. If you have some of these ideas, that center of axis, the center point, you know, above and beyond just the center line, then fantastic. If you don't, maybe if you're at that point in your development, then maybe, you know, start to explore these ideas and see how it works and see where it takes you, and just explore it, because there's very little harm in exploration. If what these ideas are, if they parallel reality pretty well, then you have nothing to lose, okay? And if you try it and you find that it really doesn't work for you and you think I'm absolutely full of it, well, then that's another thing that you learn, and just take it and throw it out, right? Anyhow, that's pretty much all I've got for the moment. Feel free to check out the website, Tienlung Kung Fu, Tienlung, kungfu.com. We've got a bunch of online training there and that sort of thing, or of course we have the physical school and all that sort of thing. But anyhow, I hope this finds you well, and take care. I will talk at you soon. Bye.